Chapter 49. Love is the death of duty. Aemond. Aside from their plans to fly out to Cracklaw and visit House Brune of Diarden, it seemed a regular day, all things considered. They were travelling by a wheelhouse from the docks to Vermithor's lair after seeing to Lord Ormond's Hightower and Princess Rhaenys' departures. There had been a farewell feast the previous evening, not as extravagant as Aegon's wedding, but they'd shared a last formal meal with the Hightowers before they sailed back to Old Town. His Hightower relatives had been delaying their departure for weeks now, and they were overdue to leave. But the peculiar thing was that the Velaryons were following suit. Aemond wasn't sure what had brought Princess Rhaenys back so soon, if she managed to do whatever she came for, nor why she was leaving so quickly. From what he'd learned, Bella had been avoiding her, and the oldest princess of the realm had instead spent time with the king before taking her leave for Driftmark II. Out of kinship, and because it was on the way they were heading already, Aemond had decided to join the process down to the docks that morning. Making a brief stop at the docks to wave his relatives off actually fitted their schedule rather well. Outside, Uncle Gawain rode along behind the carriage, while Sir Eric rode ahead of the coachman. Joining him in the wheelhouse, Harald sat gazing through the bar gaps in the door, whilst Aemond hummed an old Targaryen lullaby stuck in his head. Dakari, de Kieros, de Kumo, Chimiros. Harald glanced over. Which song is that? An old Targaryen lullaby, Aemond said. Vermithor is fond of it. Vermithor likes a lullaby. He likes singing. Harald's lips twitched upwards. There are several written accounts of tales where King Jaehaerys sings to his dragon. Then Vermithor is very different from Vhagar. Have you considered Vhagar's version as a commentary on Rubius' singing voice more than it is regarding Vhagar's general opinion on music? This time her smile was real. It was brief yet encouraging. He hadn't seen her laugh since their last outing in King's Landing. Are you willing to test that hypothesis? Aemond grinned, shaking his head. No, thank you. He'd leave poking at Vhagar's boundaries to a rider. And again, the terror, helplessness and uncertainty aside, it wouldn't be the worst to stand unharmed amidst dragonfire once more. Nenua Eleni Besesi Estretis Sigiela Irudas Anogrose Versuzo Udrizi Ezitos Laosi Arasa. One moment nothing was amiss, and the next they were sliding. It was the strangest thing, being trapped inside a wooden box as it began toppling. He barely had time to throw up his hands and brace himself as he slammed into the carriage wall. Bewildered, he looked over into Harald's wide eyes. It hadn't lasted for long, and it wouldn't have been a big deal if they hadn't slid off the roadside. Next, the side of the carriage lifted up, taking them along for the lift. His stomach flipped uneasily, his chest constricted, and a strange lightness made him hyper-aware of everything within the range of his senses as the wheelhouse was overturned. Arresto momentum! The carriage stopped, except not. It was still toppling over, but doing so a lot slower, as if the fall was on a slight delay. Aemond scrambled over to Harald, her magic allowing them both to readjust somewhere safer. There was shouting outside, horses neighing, and with a soft thud, the carriage pressed firmly into the soft snow. The wheelhouse moved no more, but the door was now face down in the ditch, the floor sideways, which blocked off their only way out. His heart was racing as he locked eyes with Harald, the two communicating several conversations with looks alone. What happened? Did we almost just fall over? Are you hurt? No, are you? I'm fine. Harald pulled herself up, aimed her wand, and her spellcasting made a comfortable hole in the wall they could climb through. Helping her out first, Aemond scrambled out in her wake to join the chaos outside. Aemond! Prince Aemond! Lady Hariel! Sir Eric had dismounted his horse and came running towards them. At the front of the carriage, his Uncle Gawain was gaining control of the spooked horses. What are you doing out there? My prince! Are you well? The coachman asked, coming wide out around the carriage only to slide on the ice. Ow! Hariel cried, taking a step forwards as if to help, but nearly toppling over herself. I'm fine, my lady. The coachman scrambled up, dusting off his clothes. The ice! It slid off the road and I beg your pardon, my prince. Out of the box, he got a better understanding of what had happened. They'd been in the turn of a road, which was slightly sunken on one side. The changing temperatures of the last few days had melted the snow on the ground, then frozen it overnight, before melting it the next day, before the temperatures dropped once again that morning. The result was a perfectly smooth, icy surface. The road was slightly sloped towards the ditch, and despite not riding fast, the carriage had slid straight off it anyway. He could understand why, because even whilst Aemond was holding on to the side of the carriage, his legs kept sliding out until he found a spot with gravelly snow to grip the heels of his boots, and looked back. The carriage had turned sideways off the road, 2 wheels in the air. The horses were agitated, their harnesses tangled. All in all, it could have ended quite a bit worse. Were either of you injured? We're well, Sir Eric. Aemond waved away the knight. I'll sort this out and have the carriage on the road soon, my prince, the coachman promised, and looked uncertainly at the overturned wheelhouse. Or I could call for another, or for a couple of horses, or... Hariel waved them off. There's no need to rush. We're fine, good man. This was an accident, you can't help how the icy road was, and we're not far away from Vermifor's den. We can walk from here, right, Aemond? Aye, Aemond sighed. We'll manage on our own. It wasn't a long walk to the horse enclosure by Vermifor's den, where Sir Eric and Uncle Gawain left their stallions in the hands of the dragon keepers. It was possible to ride closer, but horses were nothing but prey to a dragon, and Vermifor had a particular fondness for horseflesh. That reminded Aemond of a morning many years back when he first claimed Vermifor at Dragonstone. Aemond had refrained from sleeping and waited for the hour of the wolf to execute his plan. At the blackest part of night, Aemond had arisen from his bed, dressed and snuck down to the stables. He'd borrowed one of the horses, and before the sun reached the horizon, Aemond had been riding out towards the Dragon Mount. Silverwing's den had been closer, but Aemond had passed it without a backwards glance, heading directly for the den next to hers where he'd been told Vermifor was most likely to be found. Aemond had become a dragon rider that morning. One of the first things Vermifor did was eat the borrowed horse. It's not as if he needed the mount to return to the castle at that point. Wings carried him faster and further than hooves. Seated on the throne where Aemond would always be untouchable, they took off from King's Landing and soared towards Cracklaw. He had Hariel, Sir Eric and his uncle as passengers. Vermifor had a saddle spacious enough to fit all of them and then some. His dragon didn't lack for size. They passed above a ship with blazing grey high-tower banners, then further out over the Blackwater Rush until they passed over the Valarian ship. They had left port at the same time as the Hightowers, but had already sailed their smaller, sleeker ship twice as far in the same time. Like the carriage ride, the visit to Diadem could have gone better too. For one, upon their arrival they'd been welcomed by the Lady of Diadem and her eldest son. Lady Brune was a blonde, squat woman with a severe face. Her son was a spitting image of her, except he was a brunette instead of a blonde. Though neither was quite sure where the lords had wandered off to. Aemond hadn't notified House Brune of their visit beforehand, but he hadn't expected it to make much of a difference. The winter season had left prolonged hunting trips, travelling or extended outings to the servants. That was why Aemond had expected the lord to be away from his own castle. With or without their lord, Aemond and his entourage were warmly welcomed regardless. Nearly an hour into the meal Lady Brune had whipped up for him, the doors opened, and a tall, lanky lord staggered inside. Lord Brune seemed so befuddled to have a prince under his roof, he behaved as if he wasn't familiar with his own dining hall. Apologizing profusely for his lateness, the lord sat down in the wrong seat. only to remember himself when his wife gave him a death glare, and he stumbled in his rush to switch. Perhaps Eamon's presence was simply that intimidating, or mayhaps it was but old habits. Having passed 40, Lord Brune was no youngling, but his father had passed away mere moons ago. Being relatively new to his station as the head of his estate, the man might have forgotten it was his duty to sit in the Lord's seat. Discussing their plans for Cracklaw hadn't been ideal without the Lord present, but once he finally showed, the confused man did little but slow down the rest of their meeting. Talking with a pronounced stutter, the man struggled to converse, and listening to his concerns about having dragons for neighbors was making Aemond impatient to be anywhere else. In the meanwhile, Lady Brune had sunk her claws into Heriel and trapped her in between her many daughters and granddaughters. His discussion with Lord Brune was constantly interrupted by bursts of giggling and dramatic arm gesticulations from the opposite end of the table. His betrothed looked both overwhelmed and a bit lost, but kept her composure until they politely took their leave. The afternoon was upon them as they moved on towards what Aemond was most excited for: to see these lands on Cracklaw for himself, to the point where he was to build a future. This is the whole village. Aemond knew Heriel had visited once with Rhaenyra, and he'd been warned that the town wouldn't be sizable, but it still failed his expectations quite considerably. It was dreary, small, scarce, and lacking in nearly everything. It was but a gathering of poor fishers, banded together at a desolate piece of wild lands. It was easy to count inhabitants as well, as every single one had come pouring out of their small wooden shacks to behold Vermithor. Sir Eric and his uncle were keeping them back for now, though Vermithor was sufficiently intimidating to keep most at bay. The small folk pointed up at the dragon that was almost larger than their whole town. Aemond had caught a few of the remarks though. How large Vermithor was compared to the previous dragons that had visited. Larger than the princesses. If nothing else, that perfectly honest remark had brought a smirk to Aemond's lips. Aye? Heriel looked at him quizzically. Why? Because this won't do. We need more small folk to ship food, farm the lands, and tend to the structures. Then have adequate housing and food for the people required for those tasks. This is barely enough for a minor keep, where half could barely be able to run an effective kitchen for a lord. Far less a dragon's sanctuary. Managing enough food for the dragons too young to hunt is a business in itself, more so in winter. Aside from dragon keepers trained to raise dragons, there's the staff to clean, to maintain the structures and make sure it's adequately stocked. And then it's the constant need of protection. We'll likely have dragon eggs here. Unless properly guarded, they could be stolen. This simply isn't sustainable. They managed on Dragonstone, and that's not exactly a populous place either. Dragonstone is uniquely suited to host dragons because of the volcano, but as is the case with King's Landing, we don't have that either. Besides, the larger dragons hunt for most of their meals on their own, and the rest of the food shipments for the dragons are financed by King's Landing. But that won't be the case for us. The Crown agreed to finance the building projects, but as the Lord, Rubis is expected to make the gift self-sufficient. Or they were expected to make it a profitable avenue for the Crown, Aemond surmised. This would be his legacy one day. If it'll make a difference to the tally, my personal maid, Aliza, volunteered to move here with her family. Her husband is the stable hand at Dragonstone, and they've got 3 sons and a daughter. Aemond chuckled. Then we have enough people to tend to a handful of horses over a few years. That'll be enough to feed Vermithor for a week. What of the rest of the year? And what about Vhagar? She's hunting less and less for each passing year, too large and lazy for such one she knows will feed her. How on earth does the king pay for this in King's Landing then? Taxes. Heriel frowned, looking over the small number of people, and realizing the same as him. These people were too few to make difference. Then we need to make Port Point more attractive for small folk to settle here. How? It's not anything. Aemond glared at the pitiful sight, irritated by the unremarkability of the place. Who'd want to live here? We do, she reminded him. This gold going into the Dragon Point and our keep, couldn't some of it be used on Port Point instead? On building a better harbor. Get a few better wells to sustain the influx of builders and tradesmen. To put down a proper sewage so the whole place doesn't stink up within a moon. A road that can get people through the swamps without dying. And connect port points back to the mainland in a manageable way for trade. If we want more smallfolk, we need to make it somewhere they want to come. Make it somewhere better than what they have, so it'd be natural to upend their lives and relocate here. They should be our first priority. Aemond was shaking his head before she was done talking. Those are pretty words, Hariel, but it's not feasible. That'll cost more than our keep. We'll end up with half a harbor and an abandoned sewer that couldn't be completed before our funds run out. Then where the hell are we supposed to live? Our coffers are not infinite. She smiled wryly. Perhaps not, but I'd say Hagrid and my magic will at least double it, if not triple them. You can magic up gold? True gold? No, it's impossible to make gold with enchantments. I could create something that looked like gold for a while, but nothing that'd last. I need a Philosopher's Stone for that. Hariel explained, shutting down that titillating idea before it could take hold. But even without that, we still got so much else. Just think, anything that's bought can be duplicated by magic. You've seen some of what I can do, but not everything. And I assume with some practice in this branch of charms and transfiguration, Hagrid and I will only get better. Digging ducts, lifting stuff and carving and transporting materials, such tasks that's costly and time-consuming is significantly easier with our magic. Even shipments can be accomplished with dragons and Hagrid's magical chests. We simply have to dump the materials into the chest, then fly it back here and levitate it out. That way, what would be a 2-moon-long project can be accomplished in a day. Through magic, the value of everything bought will be multiplied. Another alternative is if we need glass panes from Mir for the windows. We could fly and get them from the glassmakers tomorrow and return to Crackle the next day with the glass packed safely within Hagrid's chest. And once here, our magic can easily multiply each pane into 3, tripling what we've bought. Or turn the glass into any color tinted shade imaginable, perhaps even sell some of it for a profit. Hariel shrugged. We could make glass gardens, like the ones in Winterfell. That's true. And it was. Though it also left Aemond with no idea of how to measure the cost of this project anymore, nor how many people were needed. Normally, getting a shipment of glass from Mir required 1 crew and ship to transport it, and another few builders to actually build and install it. But with Hariel's version, the ship and crew were completely obsolete. Though as for the glass houses? What heat source does it stand on? We have neither hot springs nor a volcano to keep a glass house warm through winter. Hariel sighed. Do I have to find solutions for everything? I don't claim it needs to be the exact same. I just say you have access to a resource no one else in Westeros does. Stop complaining and use your imagination. Instead of being hung up on our limitations, try imagine we can make anything at all, and then tell me what that is, and I will be the one to decide where it's beyond Hagrid and I to make it come true. But from where I'm standing, I don't see why this can be everything we both want. Aemond smiled. You make a compelling point. He looked over the measly little village once more, trying to imagine it expanding. When Aegon the Conqueror landed in King's Landing with his fleet and ready for war, ergo where the city stemmed from, it had been nothing too. If King's Landing could go from an unremarkable stretch of beach to the second largest city in Westeros in 100 years, what could he accomplish out here on Crackle? Though we'll need a maester sooner rather than later to help plan this, one with an architectural link. Whoever it is, make sure they have one in the mystical arts too. The one who have not studied magic are always so quick to dismiss Hagrid and myself. And even some of the maesters who have a Valyrian link are convinced we're black sources, and our magic stems from our secret devil practices of feeding baby boys to the others. Aemond laughed and pulled her in, placing a cold kiss on her mouth. Oi, what are you doing over there? Pulling back, Aemond glared over his shoulder at Sir Eric. It was but a simple kiss, sir. Don't give me that look. No need to call Vermithor. I'm merely making sure it stays that simple. Uncle Gawain looked at the Kingsguard, amused. How much trouble can they get into in a place like this? He challenged, gesturing around the winter landscape above them. It's very cold and it's more likely to put on more layers than anything unseemly. After the port point, they flew out to the point, the cliffside furthest out on the peninsula. One could not walk a step further without tumbling into the sea. The wind hit differently without dales and trees to shelter them. Huddled in cloaks, they walked up to the cliffside, gazing out towards the gnarly sea stacks just off the coast. Their protectors and chaperones were both following in their wake. On Eamon's orders, they get within sight, but not within earshot. There was no need for anything more out here. This wasn't King's Landing, where someone could be lurking behind any corner. It was an open seaside, and they'd see anyone coming for miles. We may have to order food from Essos if winter lasts too long, Aemond mused. They were standing at the edge of his father's kingdom, and it was peculiar for Aemond to know that somewhere beyond this horizon was Essos, the home of his ancestors that once laid across the narrow sea too, until it had been lost to the doom. Aren't the winter stores stocked? Ariel asked. Clearly her mind had not been travelling along the same lines as his. She'd misunderstood. They are, and the ocean remains an available source of food, but I was thinking in regards to our wedding feast. Isn't that a bit early? Ariel wondered. It's over a year away. It takes time to plan a wedding, especially through winter. Ariel nodded slowly, looking concerned. It's maybe spring by then, Aemond remedied. It will be very unfortunate indeed if winter hasn't passed by the time we're to wed, but by that point our autumn stores will be 2 years old and probably getting scarce. Do you think winter will last that long? Not truly. I've never experienced a winter that lasted 2 whole years, but my grandfather remembered one in his youth that lasted nearly 3. It was a bitter and hard one. Even people in the Reach were starving. Ariel was growing very worried about this threat, so Aemond kept talking before she started using the winter season to delay their wedding further back yet again. What I mean to say is that it could happen, though the chances are minimal. My grandfather's not a young man and he's only known it to happen a single time in his life. Realistically, I need to tell you something. She cut him off. Aemond halted. She'd said it quietly, but the tightness on her face was dead serious. What is it? It's about something Bella told me about Aegon. Ariel took a deep breath. The night when he fell, when they were atop the belfry, she said my alarm spell, the one I used to signal Hagrid that I needed help, was what made Aegon slip off the tower. Aemond stared at her, his brain trying to catch up with his completely random tangent. What? Aegon fell because... Pardon? She told me the lightning spell startled your brother and he fell. My sister told me nothing of the sort, he remarked. Not to the king and not to me. Bela said Helena didn't want to involve me, that she was keeping a secret for my sake. Aegon hasn't mentioned that detail either. Does he remember anything of his fall? Aemond ignored that and asked pointedly, Who else has Bela told this tale? I don't think she's told anyone but me. We had a disagreement and she brought it up. Wait, is this what's been occupying your mind? What caused that rain cloud in the hallway? And honestly, you seemed rather subdued during yesterday's feast. Ariel shrugged, giving a small nod. And you believe his tale? Of course, Bella wouldn't lie. Then how come Bella never said anything about it earlier? How come my sister failed to mention it? They both admitted there was an argument, that it was icy, dark, and everyone was slipping around on the ice up there. Do those factors no longer remain the truth? I think so. But somehow Bella now claims those other factors don't matter and is cherry-picking the one other thing that she had nothing to do with. Some light and noise in the distance. And she is trying to say that is the reason for Aegon's fall. She struggled to find words. Aemond snorted. How convenient for her. Who could have guessed it? After the scrutiny and whispers at court and Helena out of the way to set the matter straight, Bela suddenly changed her story to make it sound like Aegon's fall had nothing to do with herself, but instead tries to push it all on you. You who are down in a dungeon with an injured dog is somehow at fault. You who are with my grandfather and in front of several guards when Aegon was discovered is at fault, instead of the girl fighting with my brother at the top of a tower. Bela is not a liar, Ariel argued. Then is it but a coincidence that the instant Bela got angry at you, she also suddenly remembered this crucial little detail that happens to make herself look less guilty of pushing her unwanted husband of a belfry? I know you don't hold much regard for your cousin, but Bela wouldn't lie about something this important. Aemond rolled his eyes. She would not, Ariel protested, and instead of getting angry, she was getting pleadingly upset. Put your dislike aside for a moment, please, and momentarily imagine that what I was told is actually a fact. I was nowhere near that tower, but everyone in the Red Keep must have noticed my spell. That's why I cast it, to get Hagrid's attention, and I didn't know where he was, which is why I made sure everyone had to hear it. What if my spell did startle Aegon? What if it did happen? Aemond looked into her hard gaze, so vulnerable and fearful. What would that mean? She asked with urgency. To me. To us. He didn't care for her defeated tone. She talked as if this would change matters, as if she'd be punished, that it was her fault. Everything in Aemond rejected that notion, and it only intensified his disgust for Bela. Perchance Aemond would have a private talk with his good sister when he returned to the castle. Perhaps he'd summon her atop that belfry to have this talk. He'd go through the scene, have Bela demonstrate exactly how this was not her fault, and when she failed at that, perhaps he'd point out that it wasn't only Aegon who could be pushed off a tower. Maybe she needed reminding of how easily it'd be to make it look like an accident. That the excuses could work for more than herself. Even if there was some thunder and light across the sky whilst the bride and groom were fighting atop an icy belfry, then it's ignoring every single other factor at play. I was drunk too that evening, but I barely registered the noise. I heard it, but it's not as if I've never heard thunder before. You can't be blamed for a person hearing a noise at an odd hour of day. If so, screaming would be outlawed. The same with light, and it's not illegal to light a fire. We'd have to outlaw dragons. What made Aegon fall wasn't your spell. It's that he was running on an icy belfry at night, fighting with his bloody bride, which was an error in judgment on their side. Our sisters told Aegon not to climb up there, but he ignored the warning. That belfry has neither walls nor railing. It's but a raised platform with 4 pillars in the corners, and people have been at risk of falling off it in summer. It was only empty for Bela to hide there since it's known to the staff as being unsafe. Even if there was some light and noise whilst they were up there, how can it be your fault when Helena and Bela were subjected to the same spell, but were perfectly fine? When everyone else in the castle escaped your spell uninjured. It was stupid to be up there at all, and another level of stupidity to start running around fighting. Ariel stared at him, torn between wanting to believe him and doubt. Answer me this. Did you target Aegon with that spell? Make it louder and more intense where Aegon was? No. Were you thinking of harming Aegon? No. Precisely. But I bet my dragon Bela cannot claim the same. By her own admission as well as Helena's, Bela was fighting with Aegon mere heartbeats before he fell. And she did want him hurt. This was never your fault. This is but Bela knowing she has her husband's blood on her hands, as she doesn't like that the King's Court can see her for the beast she is. So to save face, she's trying to make you her scapegoat. I will not allow that to stand, and neither should you. How can you defend such a person? Bela the Bloody is no friend to you. Ariel huffed, not impressed with the moniker he gave his cousin, but Aemond thought it a rather fitting one. Bela the Bloody. Bloody Bela of the Belfry. It certainly suited her better than Lady Bela. Bela's world is turned upside down and she's going through so many changes in her life, none of which she had a say in, Ariel argued. She's allowed to be upset about them. Gods know I would be miserable if I was the one went to Aegon. So, Bela might not have ended up with Aegon if I had not supported Helena and Jace's betrothal to King Viserys. Eamon stood very still, but his betrothed watched him knowingly. "You agree with her," she stated. "I already know you dislike what I said to the king as much as Bela does." "No, I do not. It disappoints me that you'd support such a match, but I don't blame you for its existence. It'd be extremely short-sighted of me. You are not the only one who's counseled the king regarding royal matchmaking. You had attend thousands to speak their opinion on that topic. At this point, it's not on you if you happen to act on a course of action that aligns with something you said. At the end of the day, you hold no power over House Targaryen, nor do you hold any particular sway over the king's decisions. And you especially do not hold control over Daemon's whims. I'm not so ignorant of the system that I can't tell the difference. The king and his brother were the ones who agreed on that match, not you. To blame you would also make me a hypocrite, as I would hold an equal claim of the blame. Had I never mentioned how harmful sibling incest can be to magic, it had not become a discussion at the small council with my father. Then Aegon and Helena would have married each other as our mother intended. This is no secret, but no one has blamed me for bringing it to light. In fact, it's our duty. Even if I wished you'd held your tongue, I know you. You were under the misconception that this would somehow stabilize the situation. I know you were trying to clean up Rhaenyra's mess. Ariel blinked, her eyebrows climbing up her brows. The little smile she'd worn when he defended her before was slowly slipping away again. No, Aemond wasn't angry at Ariel for talking of Helena and Jacaerys being betrothed. This was a match that had been suggested as long as he could remember from different people at court. Other people who tried to give Rhaenyra the benefit of the doubt. What Aemond was angry about was her steadfast support of Rhaenyra, that this was something she supported for Rhaenyra's stability. Aye, that did bother him. It downright enraged him. Ariel. She could leave it be. She likely should leave it be. He'd been great to her that day, so understanding. Despite talking with that Aemond-esque no-nonsense way where he used his cutting arguments to make everyone feel stupid, Ariel had told him there was a chance her spell had crippled his brother, and Aemond was still on her side. Did that mean Ariel should return the favor now? That she should pretend it was an exaggerated remark from a little brother whining about his older sibling? He did it all the time with Aegon too, so maybe she could tell herself this was no different than Ron complaining about Percy. Except she knew it was not. This was more sinister than regular sibling rivalry, and it was coming from both sides. From how disrespectful Aemond was towards Rhaenyra and his nephews, how demeaning he viewed them all, to how quietly satisfied Rhaenyra was about her little brother being handicapped, because it meant he was less of a threat to her position, and less people were talking about Luke being kicked out of the succession for Driftmark. It was so fucking ugly, and Ariel was to marry into that drama. She couldn't pretend this didn't affect her, and to be fair, the dam was already broken. They were already confiding difficult topics and away from rat-catchers in the wall and gossiping spies at court. Here there was only Sir Eric and Sir Gawain. Both Ariel knew were too far away to have a hope of hearing this conversation. You've had your whole life to get used to this. I don't understand. Why has it always been such a sore point that Rhaenyra will inherit? It doesn't make a difference to your inheritance if it's Rhaenyra or Aegon, she asked, crossing her arms. Why would it be so terrible to give your sister some benefit of the doubt? Especially because you know how irresponsible Aegon is. How can you suggest someone like him would make a fitting king? He's never been dutiful, wise, or interested enough for such a station. No one in their right mind would allow Aegon to govern their puppy for a week. So why would anyone think he'd do better to govern the realm? I don't believe I've seen Aegon do anything but feast, drink to excess, and grope servants. But Rhaenyra cares. You don't want my answer, Aemond said. Whenever I talk about this, you get angry. Because it's unfair, Ariel said. It was unfair that only one child could inherit everything, and the rest would have to depend on the generosity of the one. It was unfair that ability and effort didn't matter, only gender and birth order. It was unfair that women were worth less than men. It was unfair that even after Rhaenyra was named heir with the king's full support, people looked to her, expecting her to prove herself worthy of it, when all Aegon had to do was be born to be worthy. It was unfair that his family refused to set their grievances aside long enough to find a solution that could benefit everyone, instead of just one. But we are to be married, and I want to know, would you please tell me why this bothers you so much? Aemond glanced over his shoulder to their chaperones, but they seemed busy with their own conversation, one Harriel couldn't hear a whisper of. I can't. I told you what bothers me, and you helped, she tried to appeal to him. And I worried you wouldn't understand, that you'd blame me like Bella does, but you proved me wrong. Can you trust me enough to give me the benefit of the doubt? He still looked reluctant, but perhaps a little less adamant. Harriel took a deep breath. Listen, granted you can speak of this in a respectful manner, and I mean especially about your sister and nephews, while we're here, alone, and out of earshot from the knights, then I promise to not repeat a word of it except with your express permission. Everything confided on this spot, here and now, will remain between the two of us. I swear it, as your wife-to-be, that I will keep your secrets. She could tell his resolve was starting to crack. You sound like a Kingsguard. They have to keep royal secrets too. Would you keep secrets from Rubius Hagrid too? Harriel bit her lip. I promise. He was relenting, but it still took several moments before he nodded. Fine. You have been misled, and I can't even blame you for that, raised as you've been on Dragonstone, with little but Rhaenyra and her lot filling your head with air. It would have given you an inaccurate understanding of her situation, one of childish naivete, but I guess everyone has to grow up sometimes and face reality. The wind whipped his hair around his face as Aemond figured out where to start, holding Harriel's undivided attention. The reason I am opposed to making Rhaenyra inherit is because it's breaking a precedent that's been kept for thousands of years, and I haven't seen my half-sister care enough about her unique privilege to do the bare minimum of upholding her honor, and she's outright failed at the few duties she's been tasked with. What respectable lord with sense would take orders from a woman with children out of wedlock? Aemond! What did I say about respect? I am being respectful, he cut her off. But if I am to tell you my reasoning, I must bother you with the truth. I can't help it if the truth is an ugly one, but if you don't want to hear it, why ask? Harriel scowled, biting down on her tongue. Aemond could make a perfectly innocent fact sound scathing, so she was sure if he really tried, he could be more mindful regarding Rhaenyra. But she had asked, and policing him was a sure way to shut him up forever. Just keep your voice quiet. He rolled his eyes, but at least she hadn't ruined it, and after another pause he kept going where he left off. The ramification of Rhaenyra's reign is doomed to be marred by turbulent uprisings of lords who never felt bending the knee while sticking only at one child meant changing the law system of our realm. That's not why they bent the knee. The day Uncle Daemon was disinherited, my half-sister was the king's only child, and our father still remained unmarried and with no proper heir. As if Rhaenyra is the first to be a placeholder in waiting of a son to be born. The lords of Westeros didn't bend the knee to Rhaenyra's divine right to rule regardless of what was to come and what she did. They didn't bend the knee to break thousands of years of our traditions. They merely acknowledged that as the situation stood at the time, Rhaenyra had a superior claim to the throne ahead of our uncle. That was the precedent for all the lords to bend, and it remains so to this day. He took a deep breath, gathering himself. Except my father never mentioned to anyone that it was permanent. He never told a single lord present at that ceremony he was changing the ruling system to follow Dornish customs. His grace only started saying so after Aegon turned 2 years old, an admission only brought forth because his council and court kept wondering why in the Seven Hells he hadn't changed the succession yet. They were all shocked to learn he wouldn't, but simultaneously not allowed to express the discontent openly. It was so maddeningly hypocritical too. Not 3 years earlier, no one had talked more of the importance of a prince apparent than the king himself. But now he threatened exile, disinheritance, and cutting out tongues if others mentioned the exact same thing. Aemond shook his head. Yet no one bent the knee for that change of rule. My king father didn't tell them, because then he'd have a rebellion on his hand within the end of the year. Rebellion? It took effort not to start accusing him of treason right then and there. The reason it'd be any rebellion would be because he started it. Why would anyone rebel when they bent the knee and swore to obey her? They swore! That's not something they've done for Aegon. No, because my father won't give them the chance. But imagine what will come to pass if Rhaenyra became queen, and the lords of Westeros were no longer beholden to a king. Only a queen they never wanted except as a last resort. They will raise their banners in rebellion, march on my sister, will have to crush her opposition, only to find more of it happening elsewhere. Do you know when the opposition will come to a permanent end? Aemond mused humorously, his expression dark. When the rebels are gone? She said slowly, unnerved to imagine what crush the opposition looked like. The Targaryens crushed on a scale no one in Westeros had been able to compete with. That's one option, Aemond mused. Rhaenyra could try to burn the realm to the ground and subject her people to her ways, true, but the more effective method would be to have Aegon, Daeron and myself beheaded. Or if she doesn't want to struggle with the political headache of being a kinslayer, perhaps she'd try to imprison us for life. If she could lock us up, she would definitely have us gelded, to prevent us having children and create more candidates that could oppose her. Though if any of us happened to have children by then, they would share the same fate. Aemond relayed those horrors in a factual tone, as if this was an unfortunate yet mundane enough part of his day. Like the belief his sister would have him tortured and crippled was no more irritating than an inconvenient potion class he had to attend each week. As if it was a matter of when, not if, his sister would try to kill him. The Dursleys had been terrible to Ariel, but she never feared they would murder her. Uncle Vernon tossed her around a few times, usually when he threw her in the cupboard, or he'd simply sat dully on her with a stick, but she'd never been scared they would handicap her either. This was a different world, and the society was so unfair she could pull her hair out in frustration. But they were still people, still family. But his expectations for how his would behave was devoid of basic humanity. Princess Rhaenyra would never do that if you're innocent and don't rebel! I don't need to take part in a rebellion to be found guilty of it, Ariel, Aemond snapped. All it'll take is Lord Boros deciding he's no Dornishman, and he doesn't like taking orders from a woman. Then the mere act of plotting to put Aegon on the throne will implicate Aegon himself. Even if Aegon is dying in his bedchamber whilst that is happening, and so deluded on milk of the puppy he couldn't tell which year it was, the fact Boros wants to fight for him means Aegon is the one who will have to pay for it. He will be held accountable for people rising to support his claim, as well as any bloodshed that happens because of it. It would be for our sake the lords would rebel, and we can't control that. We can't control their faith. Rhaenyra would have no choice but to have us executed to be able to rule with some semblance of stability. That's a monstrous accusation. She's your sister. I know you don't get along, but you're family. Kinslaying is the stupidest thing anyone with desires on the throne can do. It's evil. It's sacrilegious. And Rhaenyra would never be accepted if she was a kinslayer. It's a stigma so sinful she'd never be able to shake it. Unless she wants to be remembered as the second Maegor the Cruel, the kinslayer, that alone would be reason to leave you unharmed. And as for the people, I don't understand why they wouldn't want her now, when they were fine bending the knee in the past. It's about tradition and precedent. For Rhaenyra to change their minds, she'd need to be King Aegon I come again and conquer Westeros under her way of ruling. But don't hold your breath. She's proven time and again how she's nothing like him. Aegon the Conqueror was meticulous and strived for the kingdoms, whilst my half-sister has no interest in the easiest of responsibilities, or what it means to actually be a ruler. If you want a glimpse into how she'd rule the kingdom, just take a moment and objectively consider how she handled her alliance with the Velaryons. Aemond gestured out towards the ocean, somewhere in the direction of Driftmark. The king offered the alliance on a bejeweled silver plate for Rhaenyra, A marriage alliance that would secure her claim on royal validity and multiply her military power both, strengthening her position beyond what any other match could hope for. And what did she do? Rhaenyra took the bejeweled silver plate, shattered it, and threw the pieces about without a care. And for what? To fuck around? His sneer was ugly. And this is the woman you claim is suited to rulership. Then it's how she sorted out her own succession. Look how she's handled that. That alone promises rebellion in the future. If not from our end, then from the half-siblings arguing with each other. Why would a trueborn like Prince Viserys Velaryon sit idly by when all his elder brothers are bastards, when he would have a better claim to the throne than the strong boys? Rhaenyra lusts for the power, but she does not but flaunt the rules. She should not become queen because it will only lead to generations of wars. She is the prime example of why daughters do not inherit before sons. That's so insulting! You don't know that! You've never had a queen regent and therefore can't say one way or another whether women are suited. But I have. There was a queen in my homeland, Queen Elizabeth II. Harrell said fiercely. No one protested her validity in the slightest, because no one was hung up on it the way you do here. You've mentioned that often enough, but she also said she inherited after her father. Tell me, did your dear queen have a brother? Harrell's stomach sank. Not exactly. It's a simple enough question. Did she or did she not have a brother? Half or full brother, doesn't matter. Only if it was from the side of the family that gave the sibling a claim to the throne. She had a little sister, she mumbled. So your queen had no brothers to inherit when she became queen. That sounds reasonable enough to me. That's a succession that would be supported by the laws of Westeros too. Don't tell me, if your uncontested queen had a brother, would she have remained uncontested? Aemon pushed. Harrell's gaze fell towards the snowy ground. No. Had Queen Elizabeth had a brother, she would never have become queen to begin with. The rules of succession to the English throne, of a son inheriting before daughter, and a daughter inheriting before uncle, was the same in England as the precedent for succession in most of Westeros, except Dorne. Harriel had learned of this in Muggle school, and from Aunt Petunia's gossiping in general. Queen Elizabeth's father, King George VI, had inherited the throne from his brother, Edward VIII. It was originally Elizabeth's uncle Edward who had been the King of England, but he was forced to abdicate in a pretty big scandal, which Harriel had heard Aunt Petunia gossip about with the neighbors several decades after it happened. Because King Edward's choice of wife wasn't popular with the English people, they didn't want an American divorcee to be their queen, which meant for the king to have his lady love as his lawful wife, he had to make a choice, the throne or her, and he picked a woman ahead of his people. He'd been hated for that choice, and his wife more so. Yet King Edward chose to peacefully abdicate and pass the throne to his little brother George, who did not have a son, but a couple daughters. So after his death, the throne passed to his eldest, Queen Elizabeth II. No, Queen Elizabeth would not have been queen if she had a brother, Harrell admitted. But the fact she didn't was a good thing, Aemond, because it's proven quite an important reality. A queen regent can be just as capable as a king. It's nothing but people being stubborn that gets in the way of it. She wasn't sure Aemond had heard much except the part where his point was vindicated, but at least taken it to mean something very different. Are you trying to lecture me about how the people's opinion doesn't matter now? That we should ignore the wishes of the lords and the people we govern? That we and we alone matter, and we don't need their cooperation or opinion? Harrell had no way to answer that. The people mattered, of course they did, but it wasn't just her. There was Queen Mary I, and Queen Elizabeth I, and Queen Victoria as well, long before Elizabeth, and they were able to be queens too. They inherited the throne. And did they have brothers? Ariel tried to think. She couldn't really remember the details around their situation when they ascended the throne as well as she could the Queen of England when she'd grown up. But she knew the answer anyway. There was only one way women became Queen Regent in England, and it was when they had no other brother. No. and yet you keep supporting Rhaenyra. Do you honestly don't understand then? To me, it sounds like you're merely being stubborn, not because you believe Rhaenyra is particularly suited, but because you dislike Aegon. Talking badly of Aegon doesn't make Rhaenyra any better suited. Her failures had nothing to do with Aegon to begin with. It also means you have little to no regard for the larger ramifications to the realm's stability. That your naive principles are more important to stand by, even if it means war and ruin for everyone else to see them happen. Aemond couldn't have hurt her more if he'd slapped her. Don't twist my words! I would never support war! It's not the same! Westeros is worse at giving chances than back home. If this was England, then Princess Rhaenys would have become queen after King Jaehaerys, and there wouldn't even have been a need for a vote. It would have been her right. Perhaps, but the lords of Westeros didn't want her. Take this into account too. Princess Rhaenys and my sister's situations are not the same, Aemond argued heatedly. Princess Rhaenys' claim to the throne was much stronger when she contested my father's heirship than my half-sister's hold against Aegon. But she still lost. Princess Rhaenys' reputation was spotless, her succession uncontested because she already had a true-born son, and her ability to rule superior. Neither a superior birth claim nor capability was enough. In comparison, Rhaenyra has an inferior right, she's proven incapable, and to top it off, she's also sabotaging her own stability with one idiotic decision after the other. All my half-sister has are stale oaths given by dead men under misleading circumstances, as well as my father's favoritism. Aemond licked his dry lips. I don't pretend the last one doesn't matter. It's the only thing that gives her claimant any weight. I can acknowledge that too, but don't pretend the rest is insignificant. It doesn't matter if you agree with whether it should be the way it is. All that counts is that others actually do believe it, and what sort of division that leads to. How can you be so stubborn? How can you not see what a disaster my father's succession is doomed to turn into unless Rhaenyra steps down? Why doesn't Aegon step down? What the fuck do you think he's been doing for the last 17 years? Aemond asked, sounding genuinely incredulous at her remark. Aegon has said 1,000 times he's not interested in the throne. He's declared loudly before the court and king since he was a child that he doesn't want it. If that wasn't enough, he's done naught but act like the most unsuited prick that has ever breathed. It hasn't made a lick of difference, Hariel. The only way for him to step down is by killing himself. Because Aegon doesn't need to push his rights for his claimant to be glaring down my sister's neck. The precedent pushed by thousands of years of our laws and tradition does so in his stead. He was on a roll now, and she couldn't hope to get a word in edgewise. He must have caught some of her protests on her face because he said fiercely, I know better than anyone what my brother is, and I may not like it, but my personal opinion on Aegon's lacking capabilities doesn't change that my older brother is, and always has been, the lawful heir since the day he was born, while Rhaenyra is the one being forced on the realm. Unless Aegon, myself, and Daeron mysteriously ends up dead before our father succumbs to his ailments, we need a fucking miracle to prevent rebellion if Rhaenyra tries to become queen. However, Aemond took a step closer. Out here amongst the endless ocean and snowy fields, the icy fire of his lavender eyes held a feverish intensity. Unsuited though he is, there is a very good chance war can be avoided if Aegon is crowned king. Who would acknowledge Rhaenyra as anything but a princess without our father forcibly bending the realm to his will because he alone thinks she's special? He challenged her. I think they both are unsuited to the duty required of a good monarch, but the king keeps a small council for a reason, and I'll favor the option that doesn't include war and dead dragons any day. Because unlike Rhaenyra, I care about what our father playing favorites to his own whims will cost Westeros. Without such fundamentals, we only have anarchy. If Rhaenyra can be queen ahead of Aegon, what's to prevent an uncle from usurping his nephew? What's to stop a little brother from supplanting the firstborn son? An aunt from taking her nephew's claims? We are opening up a precedent that everything is allowed, and if everything is allowed, then we breed chaos. He talked pretty, but Hariel was sure that wasn't the entire reason. If Aegon was king, then until he had kids of his own, if he ever could, then Aemond would become Aegon's heir. And Hariel hated that. She did not like that possibility in the slightest. That was not what she signed up for, and seeing a foreign witch so precariously close to being queen was not what anyone else wanted either. If that was true, why didn't the realm break into war when your father was made king, instead of what the rules favored, which was Princess Rhaenys? By all rights, the throne should have been hers. Laenor should have been the heir apparent, and you should never have been a prince to begin with. Because Rhaenys remains a woman, Aemon said without remorse, though looking at her as if he expected her to protest. The same as my half-sister. Ariel hated it, but at the same time, she couldn't deny that even in England, which had been far more liberal than Westeros, they'd been hung up on this too. What she alone thought didn't matter if she couldn't convince others. When the king of Westeros himself couldn't convince his own damn family this was right. The fact Ariel hated it didn't change that the rest of Westeros, with a few exceptions, held to it religiously. Because it literally was part of their religion. What was the king's decree compared to the preferences of gods? The Seven, who claimed the father was the judge and the ruler. Ariel didn't believe in their gods, but she knew the majority of Westeros did. It wasn't too different than some religions back home either, but she'd never seen it practiced as fanatically as in Westeros. Not just by one or two, but everyone. Ariel and Hagrid were the weird ones here. When Ariel gave a stiff nod, but refrained from arguing the point, Aemon kept talking. It's been the way of Westeros for thousands of years, from the Kings of Winter 8,000 years ago to the High Kings of the Reach. There's a reason they're called kings and not queens. It's the precedent of the kingdom, and one misleading oath tricked from dead men 2 decades ago will not hold up. He was getting worked up, and Ariel was starting to feel nauseous. She really wished he were simply lying, that his arguments were without worthwhile significance. But it wasn't. How could she claim the opinions passed down for countless generations didn't matter? She knew that mattered, and she'd known that all along. Ariel absolutely knew why Rhaenyra's claim to the throne remained shaky, even if she felt more secure with Aegon crippled. For that matter, Rhaenyra also liked how Ariel's marriage made Aemon's claim weaker, but that was part of the issue too. Rhaenyra only got a better claim by weakening her 3 little brothers, not by strengthening herself. So if Aegon was publicly unsuited for being a cripple, and Aemon was unsuited for being married to a foreign witch, then what about Prince Daeron? It'd be hard to find fault with him. A healthy, dutiful dragon rider fostered in Old Town, and betrothed to a Baratheon lady of high birth. He might be the youngest child of the king, but in the eyes of Westeros, his claim to the throne remained superior to Rhaenyra's too. Since at the end of the day, Rhaenyra's issue wasn't that her eldest children were rumored to be bastards. That wouldn't become an issue until the day Jacaerys pressed his claim to the throne. As of now, the issue was because Rhaenyra was a woman. Something she couldn't help but being born as. No more than Jace could change his parentage. You make Rhaenyra out to be this horrible, cruel lackwit, that all she does is treasonous and stupid. But you yourself is guilty of treason too, Aemon. This topic is dangerous. Aemon smiled wryly, even if there was little amusement there. Oh, this conversation passed far beyond treasonous a while back, my dear. With a sense of spiraling dread, she reached out, entwining her fingers through his. Even through their individual angers, she needed to hold on to something as everything felt too dangerous, too treacherous and unsteady. She may just float away without an anchor. Maybe it helped for him as well, because when he spoke again, his tone was slightly softened. The lords are already feeling cheated. Why else do you think my father hasn't called them all back to bend the knee to Rhaenyra after Aegon was born? It's because my father knows it would become an opportunity for lords to gather and show open discontent. If forced to bend the knee again, some will choose not to, on their own honor as followers of the Seven or the Old Gods, because they value the traditions of their people more seriously than a sick father's blinding favor for his daughter. Like the Hightowers, she guessed. Aye, Aemon said. They'd never bend if forced to make that vow again today, and they would not be alone. But if lords do not bend the knee to my father's demand, my father's comfortable bubble of delusions will be popped, and he'd have no choice but to imprison the lords who refuse to obey his wishes. But imprisoning them means the regions where those lords rule will break into rebellion. And then we have conflict, something my father doesn't have the stomach for. He shrugged. He's waiting until he's dead and allowing his children to take the blow he can't face himself. He wants to be dead before becoming known as the king who broke Jaehaerys' peace, and he's leaving us to take the blame for his creations. At the end of the day, it has nothing to do with Rhaenyra. She's utterly irrelevant to me, except that she's dooming us to war. What makes this insulting is that she's already committed high treason. She's not suited, wanted, and it'd be better for herself, her children, her family, and the realm if she let go of her self-importance. Why do you defend the importance of her arse being the one warming the throne when it means war and death for everyone else? Because even a blind worm can tell she's better than Aegon, Harrell argued heatedly. If that's what you predict with Rhaenyra in charge, how much worse will it be with Aegon's sword on the throne? At least Princess Rhaenyra cares. She actually has something to prove, unlike Aegon, who wouldn't care if the dragon pit collapsed tomorrow. The only thing that'd get his attention was if the wine shipment was disrupted and he couldn't get wasted on his precious Dornish wine. He'd make a horrible king, a dangerous one too. If he's this bad now as merely a prince, imagine how much worse he'll be with unchecked power as a king. How can that not be a concern to you? And what of mine rights? Aemond countered. What of Daeron's? This isn't only about the two of them. This is about the rest of my life too. And why should I not oppose the candidate who threatens it? Do you think I care so little about keeping my head on my shoulders? Is it hard to comprehend that maybe I too want a life that isn't constantly under threat, knowing she can never relax safely in her seat because of my superior birthright? If she desires a steady rulership, she'll have no option but to see me crippled or killed. Yet she and her father believe that's fair, when the same isn't true for her. He made a sharp gesture, the anger growing piercing. If Rhaenyra simply gives up her claimant and supported Aegon, our half-sister could go do whatever she wants. She can fuck whoever she wants and have as many bastards as her heart desires, like Aegon was doing. Isn't that how she's lived her life till now too? One of hedonistic pleasures and no regard for consequences, be it what could affect herself or the dangers she's putting her children in. Instead, she insists on putting everyone in danger and the realm in dispute, tearing them between those who value a misleading oath and those who value faith and tradition. How the hell can she still believe she'll make a good queen regent, when she's already failed on all accounts as a mere princess, while Aegon, Daeron and I can't step down? When she's queen, we don't have the option to do nothing. It's either flee the continent or fight for our lives. The only thing that releases us from the threat is if Aegon is king, as his claim is undisputedly superior to all the rest of us. And wasn't that fucked up? Aegon. King. The very idea made her balk. He was not suited, and it had absolutely nothing to do with his missing leg. It was everything he'd done leading up to his fall. It wasn't fair at all. But was it right that Rhaenyra was pushed as heir at the expense of her brothers' lives and safety? When the same wouldn't happen to Rhaenyra if their roles were reversed. A princess had little to lose no matter which option she took, and no option where she lost everything. But she stuck with the path that threatened most lives anyway. Did Rhaenyra not see it? But how could she not, when even Hariel, a foreign witch, could see it? Did that mean she simply did not care if her brothers had to die for her? Say what you want of Aegon's incompetency, you won't hear a word of disagreement from me, but he's also never willingly put any of us in such a dangerous situation. That is all our half-sister's work, Aemond said. She blames us for her own incompetency, then pretends her hardships are solely because she was born a woman. But you know what? I know several women. Yourself, Helena, my mother, and all the ladies at court. Yet somehow Rhaenyra remains the only woman I know who spat on her duty to the crown and committed high treason. Which means any other lady here would make a better queen. But no, let's pretend this is all Aegon's fault for being born. My fault because I won't prioritize her greed before my own life. As if Daeron, Helena and I exist for nothing but to be pawns meant to serve our half-sister. It's everyone else's fault. Except Rhaenyra. Even you. No, Ariel objected. I've never said that. Though I don't have a high regard for Aegon, that doesn't affect my opinion of the rest of you. I don't blame you for the situation in your house. I might disagree on some things, a lot of things, but I am to marry into your family. This affects me too. You will? So how are we supposed to feel safe when Rhaenyra refuses to prioritize the well-being of her precious sons before her self-importance? With individuals like Daemon fanning the flame of war at her side. No one forced Rhaenyra to have bastards. She made that choice on her own, 3 fucking times. And she's put those boys in terrible danger, which she knows. It's why she ran to hide on Dragonstone. Whilst here, Harwin Strong was hanging at her side at every opportunity, staring at her sons like they hung the moon. The truth is that Rhaenyra retains the power to make the danger to her sons go away anytime she wants. All it requires is that she steps down. Should the fact she doesn't tell you what her true priorities are, Ariel? Do you still believe she'll prioritize the well-being of the realm when she never has as of yet? Not for the realm, not for her house, and not for her own children. Who was better suited to hold the throne then? A queen who'd proven dangerously reckless in ways that endangered the stability of the kingdom, who was either alright with sacrificing her siblings, or alternatively, she simply didn't understand what pushing forward might cause. Leaving the question clear enough. Was Rhaenyra malicious or dumb? Until now, Ariel hadn't pegged her for either, but if she had to pick, she couldn't entirely picture Rhaenyra being that thick. Which meant that most likely Rhaenyra valued the life of her family significantly less than she valued holding on to her heirship. It left Ariel feeling queasy. But hadn't she already known this? Rhaenyra's reaction to her little brother being crippled had been telling. Alternatively, the other alternative was a drunkard king who also didn't care for the well-being of his family, seeing how he treated his son. Like the illegitimately born boy didn't exist, while also not giving a damn about his duty. Who'd rather get drunk and fondle unfortunate serving girls than behave as a decent human being. Who started beating his 12-year-old wife 5 minutes after they said their wedding vows. Because apparently he took offense to Bella being sad? And in Aegon's drunken brain such justified slapping around his child bride on an icy belfry, only for himself to fall off instead. Was that the sort of person supposed to hold the makings of a good king? Was that the sort of person supposed to qualify as a decent human being? Realistically, didn't either option simply leave the small council to rectify whatever the ruler screwed up? And in all fairness, was it any different than the system today? Were either of them worth being fought over? There was an irony here. Of all the people in Westeros, somehow these 2 irresponsible royals were the candidates left to pick between. Ariel couldn't tell which would be better. On one hand, she liked Rhaenyra far better than Aegon. But on the other hand, she would never pick Rhaenyra's right to rule if it was at the expense of Aemon's life. That was insane! What the hell had the world come to? And why was she the only one who seemed to realize something was deeply flawed with the system if these were their only 2 alternatives? Aemond breathed heavily. If she has us killed, there'd be no alternatives to support but her, but she'd be a kinslayer, and that would cause revolt too. My death would only serve more war and disputes. Dead or alive, as long as Rhaenyra grasps after the throne, this doesn't have a happy ending. Why though? You make her out to be this evil monster with nothing but greed on her mind, but you're wildly off base. Ariel protested, because Aemon could keep saying that, he could even believe it, but it didn't make it true. She's not a tyrant. You may not be close, but she'd never harm her own family. Do you know her at all? No, how could I? Sir Laenor was a good man, but growing up, the only times Rhaenyra acknowledged me was with mocking remarks towards my mother, of how my dragon egg didn't hatch, while all the eggs of Harwin Strong's children did. For that matter, are you so sure you know her? Aemond asked coolly. Rhaenyra never bothered to feign affection for us. It wasn't before her treachery started becoming public knowledge that she started fawning over Helena. Not out of genuine love for her, but because she needs her little sister to fix her own idiotic mistakes. And I can't believe Helena isn't revolted. Though I will be fair, Rhaenyra alone is not the one who concerns me. Her new husband is an entirely different sort of beast. Do you think he would never try to kill us? Do you think if we have a son, they will be safe from the likes of my uncle? Ariel was abruptly reminded of her first encounter with Damon 4 years ago. Her Valyrian had still been shaky, and she'd struggled to catch everything he was saying, but he'd gotten the message across clear enough despite that. Do as I demand, or I'll feed you to my dragon. Rhaenyra was one thing, but Damon? The future king? The scenario Aemond's painted was far less far-fetched than she'd have preferred. Baela is married to Aegon. Damon wouldn't hurt her, or at least he wouldn't harm her husband. He loves his daughters, in his own way, and your claim is lesser than Aegon's. There'd be no need to go after you as long as... As long as Aegon lived? Aemond laughed, short and humorless. Don't be naive, Ariel. If Damon killed Aegon, Baela would be ecstatic. Ariel frowned. But Aegon, I know what you mean, that his claimant is strong. But let's speak the truth as we both know it. Aegon is unsuited. Aye, now more than ever. A one-legged cripple? No lord will respect that. But before that, Aegon had no interest in duty. He was lax and disrespectful. But so has my sister proven to be. Then again, if Aegon didn't want it, there still remains 2 more princes ahead of Rhaenyra in the line of succession. Ariel's thoughts whirled to a sudden stop. He'd hinted at this several times now, but the other times it was part of the overall arguments, lodged in there alongside Aegon and Daeron. It wasn't before now it stood out in all its horrible glory. His claim. Aemond specifically. What? She yanked his elbow, whirling him to face her. You? Why not? He asked defensively. I'd make a more stable ruler than Rhaenyra can dream to be. The lords won't oppose a king. My dragon is Vermithor, the dragon of the old king, and I'm better suited than Aegon. Except you're marrying me, Ariel reminded him. You could be king, but I can't be queen. Have you lost your wits? That would be a train wreck. Being stuck in that situation together would only serve to make them resentful towards each other. He would grow resentful that Ariel wasn't more native and keeping him back, and she would grow resentful when forced into a life of treacherous politics, and it could only end in a miserable marriage. Ariel would likely end up as disliked as King Edward's American divorcee. I am foreign, Aemond. That is, letting me near the title of queen would be such a dim-witted move. Not to mention, I don't want to be queen. That's not... No! That's not what we agreed upon. A queen must keep good relations, navigate courts, build connections, and be good at being perfect. But I talk funny. My R's are all strange. The court gowns can be so damn itchy. I get impatient with the polite nothingness, and I don't know how to handle King's Landing. I'd fail, then the lords would feel vindicated and keep resenting me for not being their daughters, and likely use my magic as an excuse to call me untrustworthy. That is how stupid tales of bewitchment start up, Aemond. They'll say, no, it's the one place I can't be either a witch or a dragon rider, and I don't want to stop being a witch or a dragon rider. I'd be miserable. I want Cracklaw. I wanted that life, and you were the one who offered it. I know, Aemond said. I've known that all along. You can't be queen. You damage my political standing more than your magic and dragon riding can salvage. If your ambition all along was to be king, why would you want to marry me? Because I love you. He paused. And because I know my place. Second sons don't inherit ahead of an elder son, just as daughters don't inherit before sons. Why is it that I can accept that reality whereas my sister refuses to? Ariel barely heard the rest of his sentence. You love me? He only hesitated long enough to give her an odd look, as if that was an unnecessary thing to have to clarify. I do. Then Aemond barreled on with the point he was making. I want the throne, I won't deny it, but my brother is ahead of me in the line of succession. Ignoring the precedent of traditional succession is what leads to no rules at all, And when there's no rules, all that matters is who's strong enough to conquer the throne, who's strong enough to keep it. Does that sound like a good system to you, Ariel? For us all to see who's the last man standing, like Migor the Cruel did? Ariel got goosebumps. It was a horrible scenario to imagine, and also, Maegor won his crown because he was the most ruthless and had the biggest dragon. And it didn't pass her by that now Aemond had the biggest dragon, after Hagrid. I'd claim the system you are championing has some glaring faults, such as how you don't benefit from any of it. That Darren and Helena can't either. It's unfair that only the eldest gets everything and the rest must beg. How can anything be stable with such an uneven balance? You are right, but supporting Aegon is still better. I wouldn't inherit, but I won't lose my head over it either. And that's what Rhaenyra is trying to push for. Anarchy. She's not. She wants to be a good queen and... Fuck whomever she wants. Reward whoever tells her the prettiest lies and keep her delusions. Aemond said angrily. It's easy to rule when there's no opposition. Look at my king father. His health has been declining since before I was born, yet somehow the kingdom keeps running without him. Do you think that's from his efforts? But a peaceful kingdom won't be what Rhaenyra inherits. She will be opposed, and in such times the kingdom will need a ruler who will be listened to. And I promise you, she will struggle to be heard above Daemon. But it should not be you causing division! Ariel burst, panic spreading like ink in water, tainting everything. You don't know that's what's going to pass! Do you know what it's like to see someone eaten by a dragon, Aemond? Because I do! I saw more than I wanted to back in Essos, and Norbert was only 1 year old back then. It'd be so much worse with... They're your family! I couldn't stand my cousin either. He was a bully, and my uncle made my life miserable, but I never wanted them dead. She doesn't want you dead either, Aemond. That is all in your head. It can't be war. Everything else is better than a war of dragons. She recalled that night he'd been chased out of Hagrid's hut, when he'd packed in a rush and ran into the pitch-black forest with Fang and Norbert, who'd been so much smaller back then. Yet Norbert had killed so many men. She recalled their screams when they burned and Norbert ate them. Ariel had no affection for the men who tried to kill Hagrid and her to steal their dragon, but she couldn't imagine how much worse it'd be with several dragons. Big, monstrously large dragons with scorching fires, claws the size of a grown man and more ground to cover. The people screaming as they died wouldn't be faceless enemies in the dark. It very well would be her friends. The worst isn't guaranteed to happen, Aemond. It didn't happen between Rhaenys and Viserys at the Council of 101. Why does it need to happen now? I don't want war and dragon fights and I don't... Aemond cupped her face with his hands, and there were still traces of the cold, icy fire from earlier, but his touch was gentle. I know you don't want that. I don't either. That's what I'm telling you. But there's nothing I can do to stop that whilst my father ignores reality. He steadfastly upheld her claim so far, and with Aegon crippled, even if he lives, there's no chance our father will change the succession now. Rhaenyra probably feels invincible. It's unfair, I know. He pulled her in, hugging her. Her arms held tight around his waist, the proximity somehow making her feel safer and a little calmer. It was a terrible thing he believed, but was he right though? It wasn't all delusions, that was true, but maybe it was exaggerated? Though even if it was, did Aemond live like that? Fearing his own family would see him dead before trying to find a peaceful solution. They had so much wealth and power. Why was it so impossible to share? She couldn't imagine what that was like. Hagrid told her Lord Voldemort once tried to kill her, but she didn't remember that, and he was long dead. The worst she'd feared was failing potions because Professor Snape hated her. My prince, Sir Eric called, trudging through the snow. Aemond held up a hand. One moment, Sir Eric. It's getting late, my prince. If we're to fly back before dark, we shouldn't dally much longer. So be it. You may start heading towards Vermiford, We'll join you once we're done here. Sir Eric glanced uncertainly to Sir Gawain, who shrugged. The Hightower's face was barely discernible underneath his layers of coat, hat, scarves and gloves. Aemond grabbed her arm, turning her away from the knights to face the cliffside instead. I mean it. I do not want you harmed, he said, words forced out from his stiffly drawn mouth. Mindful of the proximity of the knights, he kept his voice low. Knowing my situation, I, as your betrothed, will be doing you a great disservice to pretend it doesn't affect your future too. I'm not so generous I'll break our betrothal, because I'll only leave you open to be forced into marrying Joffrey on fear of losing Cracklaw, and I don't want you to aid those who would rather see me dead. It's not what I want, but if you want... Aemond rubbed at his temple, his expression twisted as if he'd bitten down on a lemon. I could get you out of here. Ariel stared at him blankly. Pardon? You would have to abandon your inheritance, your station in Westeros, and you could never come back. You would have to leave Norbert and Vhagar, because there is nowhere you can go with a dragon where you will not be found. If you leave everything, I can make arrangements for you to go into exile in Essos. It will be exile, and you will have to run far for Daemon's dragons not to catch up or my family's spies to locate you. But if you flee far enough, it can keep you out of this. Of all he could have said, that was not the turn she'd expected. It didn't seem Aemond had considered it for long either, and even as he said it, he was regretting it. But once said, he was too stubborn to back out too. What would you do? Would you, after what you just said, would you not want to go too? No. He almost sounded baffled. Was war the preferred route? But then, Ariel could not imagine abandoning Norbert here alone. Despite the fact Norbert was a human eater, they had raised her and protected her. But Aemond would have to leave so much more. His family, his dragon, but also know his absence would endanger everyone he abandoned. It was the same for Ariel though. Whatever may come, she would be abandoning them to their fate too. My prince, Sir Eric called out again. What? Aemond whirled back, thunderous. In the distance, Vermithor let out a loud, hot snort that made the air ripple with steam. Nothing. They knew what he wanted though. The sun was nearly set and darkness would be upon them soon. Ariel didn't want to go either. It felt wrong. They couldn't leave it here. But at the same time, they couldn't discuss it in front of Sir Eric and Sir Gawain either. Vermithor was stretching out his wings. The knights wanted to leave, and they had stayed longer than planned. So with only a miserable glance at each other, they rejoined the rest so they could travel back to King's Landing. Climbing up on Vermithor was so different from Norbert. She had no control of him, and he was so massive. Despite the unfamiliarity of riding a dragon she had no bond with, she barely paid attention as they set off again. She was too preoccupied. Ariel could now appreciate how crucial Vhagar was in a way she hadn't before. Hagrid might serve as the oblivious balancing point that decided which faction of the Targaryens held the upper hand. Ariel always knew how dangerous Vhagar was, but at the same time she hadn't, not in the way it made sense now. She'd thought Vhagar herself extremely dangerous, but the person aiming her was paramount regarding the basic power balance of the kingdom. It made it even more baffling that King Viserys had trusted Vhagar to Hagrid. Of course, Hagrid was amazing and the best option there was, but the king didn't know that. Outside a handful of conversations over the span of 4 years, they didn't even know each other. And if Ariel left, and what Aemond said was true, was she not more or less signing his death sentence? Damn it all! She didn't want to know this! Ariel didn't want to be in this situation, forced between a rock and a hard place, in the middle of a horde of angry dragons. Yet, she had been the one to demand answers, and Aemond gave them. Now what? They were already flying back to King's Landing, but it'd be hard to discuss this safely there. Maybe they could climb up on the roof again? Surely that was safe from eavesdroppers. Or perhaps she could suggest another trip tomorrow. But would either of them be able to sleep before they finished this? She certainly wouldn't. Leaning forward, Harriel reached out to get Eamon's attention. She was strapped into the saddle with a handle in front of her to hold on to. She had to lean around it, and even then she only reached the tips of Eamon's hair and tugged on it. "Could we stop at Driftmark?" she shouted against the howling wind. Her first thought had been to fly to Dragonstone. It was closest and they'd be passing near it on the way back to King's Landing. But they'd face the same issues with privacy there as in the Red Keep. He frowned. "Why? Just, please." Eamon nodded. "Fine." The first few stars were peeking out across the darkening sky when Vermiford landed on the beach of Driftmark. Sir Eric and Sir Gawain expressed confusion about the stop, and Vermiford joined the chorus and persisted tongue to express some complaints of his own. "Why does my pet want to stop here when Silverwing is on Dragonstone?" he grumbled. "Melis lives here. She is rude, and the small one is too lively. He's too grown to still act as a youngling." Listening to Vermiford complain about Melis and sea smoke made her smile, before Eamon took her hand, ordered Sir Eric and Sir Gawain to remain near Vermiford, and they set off walking along the beach. Unlike Cracklaw, with high cliffs, thick forests, and dales where snow collected over time and remained untouched, on the beach of Driftmark there was only a light cover. The flat terrain and lack of trees allowed the wind to blow away most of the snow, and nothing at all was left where the sea met land. "I think we may have to take advantage of the hospitality of high tide tonight," Eamon remarked, looking towards the climbing moon ahead of him. "Princess Renice has returned and will gladly welcome us," Ariel said. "I saw the ship she sailed, the Lord Lenor, docked by the harbour." "Me too," Eamon huffed, his fingers adjusting his hold on her hand. "So?" he asked, open-ended. "I don't have a spell or suggestion that can salvage the situation," Ariel said matter-of-factly. He likely hadn't expected that of her, but she figured it was better to make it clear. "I have no idea what to do, except that I know that I can't leave. I wouldn't let a dragon harm you the day we met, and you were acting in a rude little princeling who thought I was Damon's bastard. Did you honestly think I could abandon you now?" "You'll stay?" Stiffly, Ariel nodded. "I will. I care for Helena too, and Rhaenyra and her children have been kind to us, and Bella and Rhaena don't deserve this either. You're not the only one I love. I can't leave, and that's because I want to stay. And because I think Hagrid's bond with Vhagar makes a difference. It's making it harder for you to go against each other, because you're uncertain which side he'll take, which side Vhagar would be on." "It is." Tilting her face up, Eamon leaned in for a kiss, but Harriel held her hand up, stopping it. There was more to say here. It had been lost amongst the many horrors of their previous conversation, but her head had cleared. As they'd soared through the dark clouds on Vermiford's back, the pieces she'd overlooked before started slotting into place. Though Harriel was set on staying, she needed him to come clean. "Tell me, after everything you just said, and with Aegon so sick, about the instability surrounding the succession, and how you're the second son, do you..." Ariel swallowed. "You have to act according to what secures your family best, and it's no secret that my foreignness and magic means I damage the royal validity of anyone I was to marry. I always assumed that could be overlooked for someone 8th in line to the throne, but it sounds an awful lot like challenging fate to marry someone who's 2nd in line with a very sick older brother. That doesn't add up. So, do you regret us? If that's the way you're seeing the situation, that you're the second, does that mean you intend to break our betrothal?" When Eamon didn't answer, she briefly thought he hadn't heard her mumbling, but that misconception ended when she saw his face. The merge of anger and bitter apology was too telling, before his hand slipped from hers. You are. Her heart dropped into the pit of her stomach, and seconds trickled by with only wind and lapping waves breaking the silence. Aemond? You couldn't even look her in the eyes. Just tell me. You've already told me everything else. It's not like I don't understand, Ariel pressed. If your concerns are valid, which I won't do you the disservice of dismissing them out of hand, you have several valid concerns, and they're not something that can be ignored, which is why I already know this won't work. It was noteworthy that she was able to sound so calm about it. It was at odds with the ice within forcing this into the open. She hoped the frozen barrier held out, since if it fractured, what lurked behind the coldness would come spewing out. If you ever have designs for the throne that I don't want, then you're right. We should stop this now. I don't want to be in conflict with Rhaenyra in any role, but especially not as your consort. I mean, no. I don't want to live in King's Landing. I made that clear, and that has not changed. I don't want to be put in that situation, and it'd be better for us to go our different ways. But just tell me already. It wouldn't be better, Aemond spat, but it would be safer. Ariel breathed. You're ending this? She'd been the one to press the issue, yet Ariel could hardly believe it. A substantial part of her had honestly thought he'd protest this, for him to explain some details she hadn't been aware of that made her worries obsolete. But no. Ariel was on the right track. This had to be the shortest betrothal in history. A couple weeks. She'd hoped he could be it. That they could make a life and find some normalcy together. She'd made so many plans. Aegon yet lives, Aemond said, his voice strangled. And if he doesn't make it, be it a day from the pain, or in a moon from a winter fever, or in a year from an infection, what then? It was becoming a struggle to force words through her throat. It had tightened like a vice. What responsibilities would that leave you to take over from Aegon? And what would it mean in regard to me? I don't know! Aemond exclaimed. I don't know what will happen, but things keep going wrong. I can't marry you and push my claim at the same time, but I don't want to marry anyone else. I don't want you to marry someone else. But I can't do as I please because it'll be on both our heads if I choose wrong. And it's fucking unfair. I don't know what to tell you. No, I'm not breaking our betrothal until I absolutely have no other choice. Is that an answer? I don't know if it is, Ariel said. I agreed to marry you and I still want that, but to wait and see doesn't answer anything. What am I supposed to do here? Would you be content to wait with bated breath to see if you'll get cast aside? What about Hagrid? His lordship was on the condition that two of us married. Does that mean he's losing everything too? What am I supposed to do here? I don't know. I don't know either. Aemond sighed. Then at least we agree on one matter. Neither of us know. Ariel tried to smile, but it wouldn't come. What was she supposed to do? Cracklaw was on the condition she married, and she had thought she and Aemond could be happy, but now what? Tears pressed against her eyes, and Ariel wasn't sure how much longer she could stomach this. It was worse than any injustice, because the defeat of their reality made it hard to muster up energy to be angry at him. If even half of what Aemond feared had validity, then how could they marry? His life, his siblings, the stability of the realm, all of it had to come first. Ariel wouldn't exchange Hagrid's safety for anyone either, so could she hold it against Aemond for having the same priorities? But it was painful anyway, and embarrassing, and just... oh, hell. Jacqueline Redwine would have a field day when she heard. Simply picturing her satisfied smugness made Ariel reconsider the option of exile. Sure, it'd be better than suffering Jacqueline's gloating, Helena's pity, Bela's vindication, and Rhaenyra's suspicion. Wait! You can't break it, Ariel suddenly realized. If you did, people would ask why, and it'd be obvious why. To Rhaenyra? To the king? Aye, Aemond agreed. And I can't break it either. No, you cannot. Is this why you offered me exile? Ariel demanded. To free yourself of me and make it sound generous. No! Aemond protested, but doubt quickly betrayed the initial conviction. Perhaps a little. I'd rather you leave than be forced to go against you. Ariel shuddered. Then do you expect me to pretend? Aegon yet lives, Aemond said quietly. If he recovers, then none of this matters. Can't we just keep being us until there's no other choice? And just pretend the risk doesn't exist. Just ignore that there's a good chance you'll get everything, and I will lose everything. Ariel asked tightly. He wouldn't be the one publicly shamed by this. It'd be her and Hagrid. To pretend as if being cast aside by a prince won't harm our standing in Westeros, as if it won't shatter it entirely. This was cruel. Aemond had been the one to pursue her. He'd pulled her into a false understanding of the situation, and almost the moment she said yes, it was only for him to pull this. What the hell was he playing at? In that scenario, I'd be king. I'd never let anything happen to you. Even if I was forced onto someone else, that wouldn't be because I wanted it, only out of duty. It'd be a dry political marriage, where we'd have an agreement for the sake of responsibilities to the realm. But us, you and me, we wouldn't have to... Would it have to end? We could... Ariel slapped him. She'd moved before she could stop the reflex, but it was one step too far. I am not your bloody whore! Are you seriously asking me to support you against Rhaenyra, whom I still have more faith in than you do, for the grand insult of serving as your mistress? I'm trying to understand your situation, Aemond, but don't fucking insult me like that. I'd sooner marry clumsy Osric and live in a frozen shed. Osric who? In Winterfell. Aemond still looked blank. The guard who protected you throughout your stay in Winterfell. Ariel sighed. The tall one, Aemond mused, but was becoming thoughtful all the same. His eyes narrowed. Why did your mind drift north? What did it matter if she told him? Aemond had shared enough to incriminate himself if Ariel shared this. If he thought to spread anything they talked of here further, he'd be an idiot. So Ariel smiled, taken by a reckless urge to remind him he wasn't the only one who'd been faced with ultimatums. I guess it's because Kragan Stark offered to marry me. His face was an unholy mixture of shock and rage. He what? Aemond snarled. Why would he do that? Because he wanted to, Ariel said. I should have said yes, then I wouldn't be dealing with this. I refuse to be passed around between lords like a fucking flagon at a feast, served up to whoever happens to be next in line. His face was drawn, his lips pale like glaciers, wearing an expression Ariel hadn't quite seen him use before. Why does it shock you? You were the one who kept thinking I might stay there. Well, you were right, he offered. He had no right, Aemond snarled. You think that was an offer? You give way to some secret, short-sighted power grab from a northern savage. As if I haven't offered you everything too! Aemond, you think this is fun for me? He interrupted her, the grip on her wrist unyielding. Do you think I am that fickle? I'd make you queen, but I know Westeros doesn't know you as I do. That they'd react even worse to a witch queen than they'd react to a queen regent crowned ahead of her brothers. With the power of a king, I could force it, but I would be opposed, and I know you'd be miserable. But if you want commitment, I am happy to give you commitment. I am committed, far more than you have ever been. You are not the one being passed around like a flagon at a feast by the system. I am! But we can put a stop to it whenever you want. We can go now. Go? Where? To the Sept. I don't want you as my mistress. I will happily marry you right now. Then there'd be a stop to all the ifs and whens. I tried to prevent it with our betrothal, to prevent exactly what's happening now when I'm being pushed to marry some stranger. But I couldn't have foreseen Aegon falling from a damn belfry. If we married, there'd be nothing they could do. I would not be able to press for the crown. I guess we'll have to pray Aegon makes it. But you would be my wife, and Rhaenyra will see you as such. Whatever might happen to me, you will suffer it too. So, I'm considering it. Ariel held up a finger. Aemon's mouth shut with an audible sound. He was so startled his hand dropped to his side too. You are? She was. Bloody hell, but she truly was. Ariel disliked breaking one of the few clauses she'd be able to press through during negotiations. Hagrid would be so mad. And it opened up an unpleasant precedent that would be hard to rectify retroactively. But she couldn't ignore that the situation wasn't the same anymore either. She studied Aemon closely, from the freckles dusting the bridge of his nose, his intense lavender eyes and hard features. He was tall and still on the gangly side. Aemon was 14, but he didn't look it. Though just because he looked older than he was, that didn't change his age. He was far too young to marry, and Ariel felt too young as well. But were they? He was too young to be a father. Ariel was no more keen for a child to have a child for a father than she'd been before. But as long as they agreed to wait with that particular aspect until everyone were of age, the marriage itself wasn't necessarily a bad idea. It was an agreement, a binding one, that could make a difference. It would absolutely make a difference. Aemon was right that marriage would harm his political popularity, which he knew perfectly well, but it strengthened him in ways Rhaenyra and Daemon couldn't possibly ignore. They had magic of the sort they could not compete with, and Ariel thought at least Bella, Rhaena, Jace and Daemon had figured that much out by now. Of course, Hagrid would never want to fly Vhagar again even if bribed with a river of gold, but he didn't trust in that promise as much as the king did. King Viserys seemed to be the only one who counted on goodwill to solve the issues of his kingdom. If Aemon was right about his sister, that if Rhaenyra took the throne and rebellion broke out in Aegon's name to oppose her, and such acts made her tempted to get rid of her brothers to prevent the riots from having a purpose, would she do so when Ariel was one of them too? Or would it give her pause? Would she make an effort to make it fair for all involved instead? Because Ariel wasn't so naive as to think she'd be counted as anything but Aemon's wife. One of them. Which also meant they would start to think of Norbert as if her dragon was on Aemon's side. That Vhagar was on Aemon's side. At the same time, he'd be bound to Ariel too. Her foreign magic would make Aemon's claim far harder, and that secured Rhaenyra's station as the heir. Would that equalize the sides better? Especially now that Aegon might never fly again. With Bella and Aegon married, then Jace and Helena married eventually too, those unions complicated matters further. Was there a reality where so many unions happened, it entangled the family into such a tight knot the sides of the lines became near indiscernible? Then again, kinship, marriage and children had never stopped the Targaryens from fracturing in the past. She couldn't name a house who bickered more amongst themselves than the Targaryens. But wasn't it worse to not try at all? She had little to offer when it came to stabilizing the Targaryens. She couldn't control whether someone could get along or not. But it was within her choices whether to marry Aemon. Bella had married Aegon for far less. She hadn't wished to spend her life with him in the slightest. She'd still done it for her family's sake. If it could help matters, if it could secure Aemon, Aegon and Daeron, why should Ariel not do this? What was keeping her back at this point? The ink on a contract? Ariel and Aemon were to be married in a year anyway. So was it more important to protect Amond in the moment or make an example in the long term? And personally, Harold did not want him to marry someone else. He told her the hard truth, he always did, which never failed to ruin her day. But that was because everyone else would rather let her remain in ignorance, taking advantage of the things she wasn't aware of. It's not as if Princess Rhaenyra would tell her this. She'd have years of opportunities, but decided to leave Harold in the dark. All of them had. The fact Aemon did her the courtesy of sharing was a rare commodity amongst nobility. And he'd given her options. He'd suggested she flee, which she declined, and now he offered to make them a team. Would you want that? Despite knowing how it would affect your claim? Aemon answered with his mouth, pressing them firmly against hers. It was dizzying. Her heart drummed underneath her ribs as one deep kiss led into a second, third, fourth. There were endless reasons to not do this, and there were a lot of arguments in favor of it. And in the end, what flipped her decision were neither. Simply that the thought of saying no at this point was unbearable, while saying yes felt like these dizzying kisses. Yes, she murmured when they parted. Yes? Yes. Harold's stomach had gone from doing cartwheels to doing aerial flips. Mere moments earlier she thought they were breaking up, but now they were getting married instead. She had no idea how it got to this, but... She nodded, unable to stop smiling as she repeated, yes. Now. Aemon was smiling too, so excited and thrilled it was infectious. You'd marry me. Today. Today? Her heart thrummed. So this would not merely be a rushed wedding, but a full-on running away to elope deal. I would, but isn't it too late? Was the Sept open this late in the evening? Come to think of it, did the Sept have opening hours? Their chaperones were mere dots on the horizon. They'd given up on tailing them properly, but they must have seen something, as they were already marching towards them. The space had been nice, but this leniency might change if Ariel and Aemon disappeared completely out of sight. They'd been stepping in each time there had been a kiss that day, so the chances they'd allow them to elope were around 0%. Aemon may be a dragon-riding prince, but they probably feared the Queen's wrath more. I'm not sure Sir Eric would allow it. Spell him unconscious. Ariel burst out laughing. She stood up on her toes, stealing another brief kiss, unable to control the giddy nervousness in her body. She hadn't felt quite like this since her last Quidditch match, since the day she flew with Norbert for the first time. This was following her gut, taking a chance, going all out in the face of the risks. And your uncle? What of him? It's late and we talked of staying at Driftmark tonight. If you need an excuse, tell them I'm too tired to fly further. Then what? Do we marry here then? It'd be hard to get away at home, but there's a Sept right here at Driftmark. There is, Ariel agreed, struggling to compose her expression as much as Aemon was. We could slip away for a few hours. If I remember correctly, you've done that before.